Aloha and welcome to the monthly show, Maunalua, Past, Present, and Future. My name is Mardi LaPrade, and our special guests today are Dr. Charles Van Rees, the Ecology Advisor for the Livable Hawaii Kai Hui, and Ms. Luka Zavas, graduate student at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, and Livable Hawaii Kai Hui Aina educator. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for having us.
Both of you have been and are involved in helping to save the critically endangered Hawaiian galanul, otherwise known in Hawaii as the ʻAlaeʻula. Dr. Van Rees, when did you begin your research on the ʻAlaeʻula?
So I started my first research projects on them in 2012, but I actually didn't arrive on the islands until I think 2014 was the first time I came and was actually doing research on them. They're just absolutely magnificent, beautiful birds. I brought a couple of photos along of my favorite sort of glamour shots of ʻAlaeʻula that are worth looking at some point. The work that brought me in the first place, beyond just them being these just fantastic, bizarre, feisty little wetland animals, was a lot of interest that came out of the work of a previous graduate student at Tufts University who had finished his Ph.D. I think in 2009. Mm-hmm. And he had done a lot of work on their natural history, so aspects of their life cycle and how they interact with their environment. And one big question we suddenly had was, we have these birds scattered across Oahu, right? They're only found on Oahu and Kauai. They had really, really intense population declines throughout the early 20th century up until probably the 1950s, 1960s, which is when they were really at their near extinction, limit. I mean, it was really, it was the fine flower for them for a little while there. And in the 70s, their population started to come back as we were establishing refuges. So on Oahu especially, I brought a map along with me that kind of shows the distribution of their habitats on Oahu. What you can see is a sort of a sprinkling of these tiny little protected areas around the island. You can see them in that hot pink color on the map. And those are the places where they're found. Now, this student before me had put these color bands on a number of these individuals to keep track of them for a different study. But a bird that they banded, I think at James Campbell National Wildlife Refuge on the North Shore, turned up in Pearl Harbor a couple months later, which nobody expected. Because these birds don't really seem to move much. So suddenly we started all these questions about, well, if we have all these tiny little habitat patches, how do they relate to each other? Are these birds moving between our protected areas? If so, how often are they doing it? How are they doing it? How do they navigate, a landscape as at times hostile as Oahu with all of its cities and its highways and mountains and things that would get in the way of a little, helpless little water bird trying to get from place to place? We knew nothing about that. And so I got brought in primarily to study their movement patterns and to try to get an idea of, okay, well, let's approach some of these questions. Let's try to understand what we call the connectivity between those different populations.
So that was the main question you were trying to answer.
That was the big one, and we tried to address that in a number of different ways. One figure that I brought along today to show is a similar map depicting all those different wetlands and arrows going between them for movements that we observed of banded individuals moving from place to place. There's actually one really tiny arrow there at the lower right corner near Keavava wetland, which is very hard to see at that spatial scale, but that was a movement of one of our birds from Keavava that went to Kamilanui and then came back, which was a super cool thing. These are all things we never would have figured out if we hadn't spent so much time putting bands on these birds and then looking for them all over the island. And we're going to be getting into that a little bit more later in the show. But so that was one of the main things, and then the rest of it was all genetics research, looking at the actual gene flow between the populations. So we don't have to see them do it, but if we actually, when they move, their genes move too, so we can actually detect connectivity in that way as well.
Fascinating. And Luka, you are currently studying for a master's at the University of Hawaii.
Yes.
What is the focus of your studies?
So the focus of my studies is also the ʻAlaeʻula, but more the relationships that they have with people and the relationships that they had in the past with the Native Hawaiians. And yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, and then I'm also continuing Charles's work with banding and seeing how they're moving across the landscape and trying to use citizen science to have people spot the birds for us and kind of bring in the ownership of caring for these birds, not just on like the university side or like the managers of these like protected wetlands, but being more of a community based. We're all together on this one island and we all want to live together happily.
I see. And how did you first become interested in this little bird, the ʻAlaeʻula?
So I got a kupu internship to work at Waimea Valley up on the North Shore. And one of the things that I noticed was early in this morning, I was hearing these like weird calls, like really high pitched, and some like tiny ones that sound like raptors. And I was like, okay, why do we have raptors in Waimea Valley? And I took a walk around and I found these beautiful black birds with a big red shield and these tiny little puffballs behind them. And there's just these chicks and the mom's feeding them, and I instantly fell in love. And then you can see the picture, I think it was on the screen earlier. I would find every excuse to be like, this is my morning job, I'm gonna go and weed around the pond and go hang out with the birds. And it even got to the point where I could see that they noticed who I was. And my favorite memory is like I'm out in the middle of the bulrush trying to pull it out to create more waterway, and we have a surfboard floating behind us to like put all the debris on top. And then the ʻAlaeʻula, like 3 generations later, their kids are coming out and hanging out with me on the surfboard, on the land, and just knows that I am there being happy with them and they're happy with me, and we're just like doing our thing together. It was really cool.
Oh my goodness.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. So the focus of your research then is a little bit historical.
A little historical, and I also want to gauge current relationships. How do people know about ʻAlaeʻula? Do they have relationships with them, and are they showing up in other people's backyards and stories that they may have with them?
Well, now, how can people get in touch with you if they have ʻAlaeʻula on their property or they notice ʻAlaeʻula somewhere? How can they connect?
So Charles and his team made a beautiful website, and the tag will show at the bottom, but it's from Tufts. It's hosted in Tufts, and they can go online, and there's a map that they can point where they saw the ʻAlaeʻula and put some information about the bands. There's also a guide there on how to report the bands, which leg to go first, and which color combo to put above the other, just so that we know that the same bird is being reported wherever it is, and it's not a different bird being mislabeled or misnamed.
I see. And then how do your studies intersect, or how do your bodies of research complement each other? Can you talk to that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to say on that. I think I'll try to start with sort of some of the things that I've been thinking about recently, chatting with Luka about it. I'm sure she'll have some other ideas on what other sort of synergies sort of develop. But of course, the first and really interesting one is that when you're doing this type of research that involves what we're calling resighting, so you mark an individual animal in some way, and then you try to identify that animal across time, and hopefully across space if it shows up in different places. And that is like really, really old school zoology type of stuff, right? I mean, we know that the Romans and the Phoenicians were doing this, like marking pigeons with things just to know whose pigeons were whose and things like that. It's just stuff that's been going on for a long time. And we're doing the same thing. And in this case, it's really sort of the bread and butter basic biology of, well, how long do they live? Do different individuals act differently than one another? How many times can they nest in a year? Do they always have the same boyfriend or girlfriend? Or do they switch a few times in their life? Or do they mate for life, and if one of them dies, do they kind of remarry, or do they not? All these questions about their behavior that you can't necessarily get at unless you have these marked individuals that you can tell apart. Because otherwise, how do you know that what you just saw wasn't some other bird that showed up from somewhere else? It doesn't, you can't sort of track the same story.
Yeah.
And so in this case now, every one of these birds gets an identity, gets a name, and we can know them personally and what their story is and what their life is. So we start to get this soap opera, which is beautiful, a really neat way of studying these animals, and then you can really get into the details and the biology, which of course helps us protect them. Now this is all great and fascinating, and it's wonderful to have these stories. But the big problem is you need so much information, and you need so much time. And so I had my 4 years coming here during my Ph.D., which kind of started us off, and I banded a couple hundred birds of the island. We have past episodes of this program talking about where I went and what I did. And it was a start, but it was only a start. It doesn't matter how hard I worked. You can only get so far in 4 years. And what we really need is continuation across time. And so the more time we get with eyes out there looking for these birds and identifying the bands and telling us where they are, the more we learn. There's actually one of the major things you learn is how long they live. If you can track one individual across time, you can see their lifespan. Very recently, there was some kind of paper or a talk that came out where some scientists showed that if you look at how long a study's been going on, that is very closely associated with how old the oldest animal is that they've ever observed, which basically means the longer you're looking, the longer they're going to live, because a lot of the time just because we haven't seen it yet.
Just getting the information.
Right, and so especially with the ʻAlaeʻula, this is a species that we really need to protect, we really need to conserve them, and we just don't know enough about them. So I think the biggest synergy between our work then is that, especially with Luka bringing in her connections and her talents with communicating with people and getting the word out, we're going to be recruiting hopefully a much larger base of people who are interested in ʻAlaeʻula, who will tell us, hey, I saw a bird that had those bands in that place, and realize that this isn't us trying to tell people what to do, it's not us trying to control anything, it's just us trying to learn more about this bird. And so this will give us more years where we can learn more about the ʻAlaeʻula, how long they live, what they're doing, how much they're moving, and as that data piles up, we become increasingly empowered to protect them.
So if someone's helping Luka with her research and reciting, which means looking again, then it goes in and it collects with the data you've collected, and it becomes a larger body of data.
Yeah, and lots of people other than myself have also were collecting some of this data before me, and so it's certainly not something that I started, but I kind of made a big contribution while I was here because I had a lot of time. But it's really a big an effort across a lot of fronts at once, and Luka's work now I think is sort of taking the torch and running along with it, which is great.
Well, Luka, what sort of places or habitats might someone look for this bird?
So you can actually find them at the wetland reserve, so across like Keavava or James Campbell, or an easy place to spot them is Hamakua Marsh, especially as you're like coming into Kailua. There's a little corner, like as you're waiting at the stoplight. I've seen 2 or 3 just hanging out there. They don't have bands, but they're just like hanging out and eating. Another place is like as you're driving down the road and you see like a little inlet that has some water in it. I've sometimes seen ʻAlaeʻula just like hanging out, especially in the Wailua area. They like to kind of like to spread out underneath the bridges. They're kind of moving between the kalo farms. So at He'eia, they have they just started clearing out all that mangrove. And I think last year they had their first sighting. This year I saw like 5 hanging out right at the bottom where like the mangroves just were. And we think they're starting to nest. And then like up in Kako'oiwi, they have a pair of ʻAlaeʻula there too. So they're following our restoration. So as we are clearing out land, as we are bringing lo'i back and building these like habitats that were there that the Native Hawaiians had created too, it's kind of like as we're healing ourselves, we're healing them, we're creating homes for them, and they're coming. We don't have to ask them to or trap them or move them. They know they're gonna come.
That's fascinating. So they're comfortable living side by side with humans, yet they remain the most secretive of wetland birds.
I would say they're secretive because they don't know us yet.
Interesting.
And a lot of places that I've been talking to and people that I've talked to, when they know the ʻAlaeʻula, when they hang out with them all the time, it's kind of like, you know, you come, you move in, you see your neighbor.
Yes.
You say hi a couple times, but you don't really see them. They live in their house all the time. After a couple months, a couple times passing along, you know, taking the trash out, grabbing your mail, you start to meet them a little bit more, and they come and hang out with you more. You talk, you exchange, you're like, oh, you have a kid, I have a kid, let's have our kids play together. And, you know, that you just build that rapport back and forth, and I think that's the same with ʻAlaeʻula. They like to have their privacy, but as they get to know you, they're like, oh, I like you. And the ʻAlaeʻula at Waimea, like, before I left, I just knew she had a nest. And I've known for about a month, I don't know, motherly instincts or whatever, but I was like, there's a nest in there. And I was just sitting on the bank and I was like, you know, kind of giving my goodbyes. And out she comes with 2 chicks following her. Aww. And she's just like, look, they're my babies. And it broke my heart because I was like, I just knew that she knew. And it was a really fun time. So,
oh, beautiful.
Yeah. So like that's kind of what I want to emphasize with this is like, we're trying to find out where they are so that we can know where to protect, so that we can know how to like keep them around because they're important.
Yes, they are.
They're the bringers of fire. They also a source of like mystery and magic, and
they're deeply woven into the Hawaiian fabric of existence, aren't they? Very important culturally and to our biodiversity.
Exactly.
So, Dr. Van Rees, what ways can people help besides doing recites? Is there something else the audience could look to do?
Sure. I mean, among other things, of course, and this is something I think we hit on a lot here, but it cannot be overstated. You know, people can volunteer, and like Luka said, and I think she put this beautifully, that you know, the ʻAlaeʻula are really following where people malama the aina around here, and you see it. And I remember noticing that in some places and being like, geez, it really doesn't take much, you know. And they show up.
It's a mystery how they notice that.
Oh, it's incredible! It's incredible, and yeah, I mean, this is part of what I was trying to figure out with my research: is how do they know? How do they do that? You know, but then we saw this firsthand. We had another episode of this program, I think, where we talked about doing a miniature restoration at Keawama, and we took care of one part of the area. We cleared some out. We planted some native sedges. We planted some ʻaeʻae.
Yeah.
Boom! Right, some bird showed up out of nowhere, and then there was a second nest at Keawama all of a sudden. It was incredible, and so. Getting involved with these organizations that are bringing back the old land management, that are bringing back the old ways, that are planting lo'i, that are removing invasives, helping those organizations out is going to help the ʻAlaeʻula. You know, if they're in areas that are going to support these freshwater wetlands, even if they're managed wetlands like lo'i, that's going to do a lot for the ʻAlaeʻula, especially on Oahu, where they have very limited space. So I think that's a huge help.
I see. Now, what plans do you have to move ʻAlaeʻula research forward? So, do you have a vision for the future?
I want to defer this to Luka first because she has a lot of really, really neat ideas on this topic, and I'll let her start. I think because her stuff is fascinating. I want to make sure we hit that.
Okay, so. I want to put a lot on my plate as a master's student. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get to it all.
That's a good way to start, though.
So the first one is to get the history and then get current relationships. And then we want to work on doing a camera with game trail cameras to see if we can put them around in places that isn't easily accessible by people or, you know, just to be less intrusive. Maybe they're not used to having people around. And we'll put the cameras up so we can try and capture if we can get their tags or if we can follow their life history using a very low intense method. And then also with the citizen science part, going out and reestablishing the mo'olelo of the ʻAlaeʻula and getting the kids involved, because changing people now isn't going to do anything. And a lot of, as my grandpa likes to say, he's like, I'm set in my ways. This is the way I've done it. This is the way I'm going to do it. But, you know, I look at my son and he's 5. And so he's been with my journey through learning about the ʻAlaeʻula, and he comes out to the Keawama wetlands and talks about them. Or he's like, oh, that's one, and tells his friends about it. And seeing that love from the keiki age, and so he's going to go out and he comes with us sometimes to go banding birds, and learning about all the science behind it can merge the two, like caring for and science, to become better into the future. And then on the citizen science part, I want to do kind of an Instagram social media take on how to do recite. So we can still recite on Tufts, and they can go on a web page. But it's kind of hard to always get to that when you're out and about, or you just see one as you don't take pictures while you're driving, but you see one as you're driving, or like walking down the street. So we have this Instagram page called Momona ʻAlaeʻula, which means we want plentiful, a lot of ʻAlaeʻula. And I'm a part of Dr. Price's lab at UH, and I have a co-lab named Kristen Harmon, and she came up with this beautiful hashtag, I Spy ʻAlae. So as you're going and you take a picture, especially if you can get one with the bands in, like the leg jewelry in the shot, you just post it up, I Spy ʻAlae, and I can easily find it so that we can add it to our repertoire. And also date and location, because we need to know where you took the picture.
That's the big one.
Yeah. And then, anything to add?
Yeah, there are, I think, a lot of directions we can go studying ʻAlaeʻula. Again, the neat part about them is when you really get down to it, we don't know that much about them. Their biology, their behavior, and slowly we're piecing things together. In the most immediate future for my research on ʻAlaeʻula, I have a research project that I'm kind of wrapping up now that was a side project during my Ph.D. and then I was too busy in Europe to finish it, and now we're finally getting it squared away. But I feel a lot of pride and connection to this project, not because I'm super, it wasn't like particularly difficult. It's not like showing off my brain or anything, but it makes me feel proud as someone who studies and loves the ʻAlaeʻula, because this whole project is about why is the ʻAlaeʻula unique? Why are they different? Right? Because they're a subspecies. They're not their own species. They're considered the same species with their cousin on the mainland. So Latin name, right? They are ʻAlaeʻula galliata sandvichensis. That's the ʻAlaeʻula. And then there's ʻAlaeʻula galliata cachinense on the mainland. And I was thinking, well, what are the differences? And if you look this up in literature, if you open up some books and try to read about it, everybody says something different. There is no consistent account. And all these, and it's usually some guy in the 1970s or something saying this, or in 1911 saying, oh, well, they're different because of this and this. And if you actually read what this person did, it's always like, oh, well, I shot 2 of them and I took some measurements and they were different. It's like, well, 2 of them is not going to help, right? Like, that's not going to tell you anything. Meanwhile, we've since I started, I think I've caught about 400 ʻAlaeʻula. Yeah. Which is it's a big sample. And so I've been looking at their what they call their morphology, how they're shaped, and comparing that to ones on the mainland by collaborating with some researchers in Canada and the United States, and also going to museums. I went to the Bishop Museum, the Harvard Museum, also the big one in New York City, the American Museum of Natural History. Took all these measurements on the ʻAlaeʻula, and we're finding that there are actually really cool, really strong differences in how ʻAlaeʻula are built physically.
Oh, really?
That makes them different from the mainland birds, right? Which, I don't know, it gives me a sense of pride, like, hey, these are our ʻAlaeʻula, they're different. The Hawaiian ones are different. And I hope some of our viewers find this kind of entertaining, but one of the interesting things is all of the aspects of them that are different are for scrapping.
Fighting.
They're for fighting, yeah. So all the aspects of the ʻAlaeʻula that are a little different than the mainland ones make them better at fighting. So they're heavier, they've got shorter wings, so maybe they don't fly as much. They've got longer legs, because ʻAlaeʻula do this kind of kickboxing when they fight. And they've got much bigger facial shields, which is a kind of intimidation thing. And so I strongly suspect what's going on is because on the islands, even before we destroyed most of the wetlands, on the islands there have always been limited wetland habitats compared to the mainland.
Right.
If you go to Louisiana, Florida, there's more than enough marsh to go around. Nobody has to fight over space. But on the Hawaiian Islands, I guarantee you these birds were always fighting over the lo'i or whatever else was here. And so I think that's been an evolutionary pressure across time, making them better at scrapping. Anyway, that's my funky little thing I'm working on now with the ʻAlaeʻula. But there are so many questions we can ask because we really know very little about them. So it's exciting to be learning, from the unknown about them and to be finding new ways to protect them.
Yeah, and maybe in the future we could find out how and when they fly. Because I notice other types of birds flying and can identify, but I've only seen the ʻAlae fly in short little jumps low to the ground.
Same here. They're very mysterious.
Or run on top of the water to try and take
That's
off.
mostly what I see, just running off.
Yeah.
Almost like they walk on water.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's amazing.
What are some, we just have a couple moments here, but Luka, what's one of the most endearing qualities if you were to personify the ʻAlaeʻula
Ooh.
that you find really special? And then I'll ask you the same question.
I think is that their family structure. So at Waimea Valley, we have, I call her Barb, and she is, I guess now the grandmother of our version of wisdom. She's the longest recorded ʻAlaeʻula that we have, about 11 years.
She was banded as a chick, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And I think, Charles, you banded her?
I think he was my predecessor,
Okay.
David DeRocher, at Waimea.
All right. Oh, cool. So yeah, so she's had, her first husband was light green, and they had a set of chicks. And then those chicks grew up, and then mom had another set, and then brother and sister would take care of them. It's just like this multi-generational family living together, taking care of one another. And then one time, mom was like angry at the little baby, and the older sister scolded mom. She's like, "How dare you scold my little sister?" And I was like, "Go, you fight for your little sister." And then after that, that little chick would just follow the sister around and wouldn't follow mom anymore. So
Oh my goodness.
yeah, so that was
So that's the soap opera you're
Oh yeah, that's exactly it. And you wouldn't know that who was who unless they were banded. So important stuff.
And, well, I think we're almost out of time, but I want to thank you both so much for sharing your knowledge and your enthusiasm for protecting and saving the ʻAlaeʻula, because that bird is also dear to my heart. And I hope that our keiki will learn to love it. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to the folks of Ōlelo, and goodbye.
Thanks so much for having us.